For today's story, we are covering a case that is being asked to be heard by the U.S. Supreme Court, dealing with the fact that people that are born in American Samoa, despite being a U.S. territory, they are not considered natural-born citizens. It's the only part of the United States that you can be born in, and you're not considered a United States citizen. And there is a challenge to this currently pending before the United States Supreme Court, and the Biden administration has asked the U.S. Supreme Court to not take this case. So they would like the people that are born in American Samoa to remain not U.S. citizens. Okay, so let's go ahead and read this. The Biden administration has told the Supreme Court it should not take up a case about citizenship rights for American Samoa, even though advocates say it would give justices a chance to upend a series of century-old precedents that have been roundly denounced as racist. Now, one of the big problems that's in play here is something called the insular cases. This deals with U.S. territories generally, and says that U.S. territories, the full Constitution doesn't necessarily apply to U.S. territories. And so whether or not it does or does not depends on specifically what kind of territory it is. It also means that the full Bill of Rights doesn't necessarily apply to U.S. territories. So the constitutional law that applies, for example, in a place like Puerto Rico, despite the fact it has 3 million U.S. citizens, and incidentally, being born in Puerto Rico does make you a U.S. citizen, so 3 million U.S. citizens, but the Constitution doesn't necessarily fully apply to a place like Puerto Rico because of something called the insular cases. What's interesting about it is when the insular cases were decided, in the text of the law decision itself, it said that this decision should only stand for a time. But as they say, there's nothing as permanent as a temporary solution. And so despite all these years later, the insular cases are remaining well in place. And of course, there have been calls to reverse the insular cases because of these reasons. And the insular cases screw over territories to varying degrees, including, perhaps most prominently, as I've been mentioning, American Samoa, which, despite the fact that they're born on this U.S. territory, are not considered U.S. citizens because that's how deep it goes. And so people are like, maybe these insular case thing, maybe that's not so great. Maybe we should take another look at that. But the Biden administration doesn't want to take a look at it for some reason. Okay, let's read more. The Solicitor General has told the Supreme Court that an appeal court had been right to find Congress should make the citizenship decisions about those that are born in territories, and that the case would be a pure vehicle. Now, whether or not a case is a good vehicle speaks to basically whether or not this is a good case to decide the issue. There are a lot of cases the Supreme Court could hear to decide an issue, but not all cases are equally good to decide that issue. As a general proposition, the more simple the case is, the more better it is. The less it involves other issues, the less it involves complications. The more pure the legal issue is, the better. And so they're saying, well, this isn't necessarily one of these pure cases. Okay. As Gorsuch has already written, the insular cases have no foundation in the Constitution and rest instead on racial stereotypes. I mean, to some degree, that is a fair characterization of the insular cases by its own terms. And Gorsuch has said the time has come to recognize the insular cases rest on round foundation. And I hope the Supreme Court overrules them. So, yeah, I mean, there have been lots of calls to overrule these in recent years, increasingly so. So whether or not this is the case to do it or not, who knows, but yeah. The group's petition says that those are born in American Samoa are labeled second class by the United States government. I mean, that's kind of undeniable because on their passports, it says they are nationals of the United States, but not citizens of the United States. So that's odd. So they're kind of equivalent to a green card holder in some ways, despite being born in American Samoa, a U.S. territory, and it's stamped right on their passport. And if they want to become a citizen of the United States, they have to go through an immigration process to become a citizen. They have to immigrate from the United States to the United States. So if that sounds weird, it's a little weird. That's the law right now. It's a little bit messed up. So yeah. The American Samoa political leadership and its delegate to Congress apparently believe the current system is fine and have filed a brief with the United States Supreme Court saying there's no consensus on the issue of citizenship, and any decision on the matter should not be imposed by the courts but negotiated through political process. The delegate to Congress, who, by the way, only gets a vote in committees and not on the floor because, of course, they're a delegate, they're not a representative, again, because they're not a state. So does Puerto Rico and the Marianas Islands and American Samoa have representation in Congress? Well, kinda. They don't have representatives, they've got delegates. And they can vote in committee, but not on the floor. Let freedom ring. But their committee member apparently has said, we don't want the citizenship very much. What? Okay. For 3,000 years on an archipelago 7,000 miles away from this court, the American Samoan people have preserved for American Samoa the traditional Samoan way of life, weaving together countless traditional, cultural, historical, and religious practices into a vibrant pattern found nowhere else in the world, their brief said. The American Samoan people, and I take right notice, American Samoan, American, but not, because not citizens, the American Samoan people have kept Samoa alive in part by preserving their unique political status. Really? Okay. The string of islands in the South Pacific has been a territory of the United States since 1900. This has been going on for a hot minute. The Supreme Court turned down a request to take up the issue a couple of years ago, but this time the court has sought the views of the Biden administration. They put out a call for the views of the Solicitor General, which is usually a pretty good clue the Supreme Court is taking it seriously. When the Supreme Court requests the views of the Solicitor General, it happens quite frequently. It's usually a pretty good sign they're interested. Doesn't mean they're going to, but it's a good sign. But the Solicitor General is all like, nah. So the administration's been under pressure from some of its usual allies in the civil rights movement to urge the courts to take the case, but not so much. They don't want to. Thus, that brings us to our end of this discussion about something you might not have known about America. It is a bizarre place with bizarre rules, where sometimes you're born in the United States, but you're not a natural-born citizen. This is the nature of, yeah. And it's been this way basically forever. And the political representatives of American Samoa apparently want it to continue that way for some reason. They like the not being citizens, and incidentally, they're not citizens of any other country. And they like the fact that if they want to be citizens, they have to immigrate for some reason, according to their congressional delegate. I don't quite get it, but that's apparently where we are. So this is a potential opportunity for the Supreme Court to take another look at the whole insular cases and maybe reverse 100 years of law that was on questionable foundation, that was only supposed to stand for a little while and has been standing for a century. And at least for a moment, that brings us the end of consideration of this case.